Kerry Nicholson is the Senior Managing Director of Legacy Partners. He's also the chair of the Runstead Advisory Board. Today he's going to talk to us about some of his past projects and what he's got going on in the future. Hello, Kerry. Thanks for coming on with us today.
Hello, Jeff. Nice to be on your program.
Excellent. So, help us to understand your background and how you got into real estate.
Well, I think like a lot of people that started back when I did, it really wasn't on purpose toward real estate. I was pre-law all the way through high school and college. And after I took a trip after college to Europe and on a safari through Africa, my circumstances changed and my father had passed away, so all financial support had gone. And when I got back, I heard about a program where you could get the law degree at night at a big bank in Chicago. And I went down to talk about it. And instead, I ended up falling in love with the MBA program at that bank, where I got a degree at the University of Chicago, Graduate School of Business, and worked through a series of training programs every 6 months at a time in the bank. And near the end of that, I wasn't very pleased with my choice, except that I took one final assignment in real estate, and then I suddenly found my people, if you will. So I became a construction lender, and shortly after that, I decided to come out west. And so I made a foray out here in November of 1977, and met a gentleman named Bob Philly, who we'll talk about later, who gave me an informational interview out here and introduced me to everybody in Seattle. And I ended up taking a job with Wells Fargo Realty Advisors, which was a loan production office for Wells. And so that started a 10-year career running that office for the Northwest for Wells Fargo. And that led to, they kept trying to promote me back to the Midwest where I came from. And so I'd fallen in love with this place. So I finally joined Seattle First National Bank, which is the predecessor to Bank America here in Seattle, and did another 10 years in lending with them, a much bigger platform with more people. And I think importantly there, in terms of how I evolved to what I'm doing now, is that I was put in charge of a big section of the special assets group during one of the big downturns in the late 80s. So I had all these big complicated non-performing assets loans. I called them fractured fairy tales in many cases. And so I had a lot of hands-on, which got me less involved with the credit side and more with the real estate side. And I also had all the bank's REO, which is it's bank lingo for real estate owned, or it's the assets you take back in the foreclosure process. And having to manage those and sell those and fix them up, it also got me more into the real estate, the actual project side of things. So then I had a hunger to find my way to the development side. And it turned out that I had lent money to this firm named Legacy Partners, which is a major apartment developer, once from the Wells Fargo platform and once from the Bank America platform. And I got to know the people really well. And just in one of those conversations, it became apparent that they needed to make a change up here. And I threw my hat in the ring, and they said yes. That was 1999. So since then, until a couple of years ago, I was the partner in charge for the region for Legacy. And that's kind of how I got here. So it's like a lot of, there weren't as many schools like, what the University of Washington has right now that are specialized in real estate back then. It seemed like people kind of fell into real estate from every other area: law, brokerage, construction, lending. There were fewer people that had it on purpose, as you might see today.
Yeah, so now as the Senior Managing Director at Legacy, tell us more about your role day to day.
Well, in that role, you really are touching everything. In fact, I remember when I finished my interview for this job originally, the CEO, who I still report to today, said, "Kerry, think of yourself as an orchestra leader." So he said, as you look around the table, you don't play any of the instruments probably as well as the individual people in the seats. Whether you take that analogy into the field of construction, architecture, et cetera, or trumpets, trombones, whatever. You don't know it as well as they do, but your job is to make that whole orchestra, sound good or perform well together. And you've done that in the bank. So he said, I think you'll be able to do that in this environment. And so that ended up being a pretty good analogy, because your whole purpose is to coordinate, because the role is big, especially in our shop, which tended to be on the smaller side, where everyone had to do kind of everything. So I would go out, look for a site, try and negotiate to tie it up, and then put together the consultant team to kind of define what that project was going to look like. Go out and obtain capital, obtain entitlements, get a contractor, negotiate all those documents, go out and get it built, get it leased, and at a certain time in the market, do the disposition and turn it into a monetized result. So it was always something that was very stimulating intellectually. I won't pretend that at times it wasn't frightening as well, because I was an at-risk partner throughout all this. Different companies have different structures, but in ours, you're at risk, and therefore you can make a lot of money, or you could lose a lot of money. So it's keeps you awake at night at times, but of course on the days when it goes right, it's also very exciting. But maybe even more important than the financial part was that intellectual stimulation that came along from having a role where you are over a month's time, you're in the world of law, and then you're in the world of marketing, and you're in the world of building something, that the actual contracting side, and you're throughout all those disciplines, you're touching and getting involved in all these different kind of problems. So it never gets stale. And I was kind of amazed, because that's a long time to be doing something kind of similar, although I did lead the evolution of the company from doing almost all garden product. In fact, it was 100% garden product before I joined the company. So I led that transition to doing the mid-rise and higher projects here in the region. But it just never got old, and the only thing is, I had a major milestone birthday here a couple of years ago, and at my volition, I raised my hand and said, I'm thoroughly enjoying this still, but I'm also aware that there's more to life than just work, and this work takes a lot of hours. So I cut myself back to half hours, and I get a lot of kidding for this, but I managed to get myself assigned to where I was going to take care of some projects we're trying to do in Maui and Oahu, Hawaii. So I actually bit off quite a bit because of the pandemic. Those markets are hurt several times as hard as even Seattle is. So it's a lesson in patience, but I think we will find our way to getting those projects to happen. Jeff, I mentioned that I had led the company's transition from garden to mid-rise projects. I think a good example that might be fun to look at is the Redmond project we call the Triangle. It's right, a block away from light rail, and it's on a very challenging triangular site, as the name suggests. But because it was challenging, it also resulted in a very interesting project. It's very iconic in its appearance. Has a little bit of the look of the Flatiron building that's quite famous in New York. But I'm thrilled that project was recognized by my peers. It actually won the NAIOP 2019 Apartment Project of the Year, which was just a great way to go out on my last Seattle area project. And I'm really proud of that. And it has some unique public art and just some interesting interior spaces, as well as iconic architecture. So really, really proud of that project. And then secondly, I mentioned that we had gone away from garden. Well, by going to Maui, I'm actually going back to garden to do one deal, because you can't support the economics for mid-rise very easily over there for rent project. So we're actually looking at a 324 unit project in Wailuku. And I may have to change course and go from conventional financing to low income tax credit financing because of the fact that unemployment on Maui right now is about 23%. It's very intense, and it's hard to tell when the vaccine and therapeutic measures will allow people to fly in enough volume to bring that island economy back. So if we go to LIHTC, low income tax credit, then the timing issue is not there anymore. There's plenty of people. They have a huge problem with affordable housing. So if we're at 60% of area median income, we're going to find tenants all day long. We'll have to have them take a lottery probably to fill it up. So that's been an interesting thing for me to come back to Garden at the end of the career. But it's a whole different world over there, and really interesting, trying to get a project approved. So I'll just put those two out there as examples.
Well, you have another hat you wear. You're also the chair for the Runstead Advisory Board. Can you share with us more about what's going on in the department, what plans you might have?
Sure. My involvement actually goes back a long way, Jeff. I mentioned earlier that I had interviewed with Bob Philly, back in the late 70s, and I stayed friends with him, and we actually did some work together because I was a construction lender and he was a mortgage banker, and we actually teamed together. I can remember calling on Kemper Freeman with him way back when. So we stayed close, and he got interested in, as his career started to near its end, he got very interested in trying to get something big going on at the University of Washington in the field of real estate. And so he started putting together an advisory board. And I think I was still with Seattle First National Bank back then. So I was asked to join that group as an advisory member from the bank several years before I joined Legacy. And it's amazing to think back. That was a long time ago. And then it evolved, and when it eventually became the Runstead Advisory Board, I was asked to join that as well in a different capacity, this time with Legacy. So I've been around it, a lot of years, and have seen all the changes that we've gone through. And it's been fascinating, to see that evolution over that time. Last year or a year ago, because it was December of 18, Peter Orser, who was the chair at the time, called me and asked me if I would consider being the chair for this year, 2020. And I thought about it for just a couple of days and said, yes, I want to do that. That would be just interesting to do and a good thing to do. I didn't know it'd be the year of COVID in the pandemic, which has had just an amazingly across the board impact on everything we do. But in terms of focus, I would say for this year, I would say there's probably 4 areas that we've tried to keep our eyes on. The first one would be in the area of fundraising, and the reason it was such a focus area is that in the pandemic, we were very concerned about having a big blowout year where we didn't earn what we normally put in the coffers to help support the program. The prior year, we had over 800 people at an event in the ballroom. And so in a year where you can't do that, we had to struggle to figure out what can we do that would be a compelling viewer from a viewing standpoint, what would get people interested. So we worked very hard and basically ended up curating a solid hour of a virtual event that had some pre-recorded parts of it. And I think it came off really well. We had over 600 people signed up for it. And most important thing is at the end of the day, we end up on a net basis doing just slightly better than the previous year. So we brought in far less income, but we had far less expenses. So the key thing is that we ended up still supporting the program to the same extent we hoped to. I would say the other significant thing that we're doing is that we've begun an initiative in the area of EDI, or equity, diversity, and inclusion, that area of social justice, racial justice. Because we realize as a board, we have over 50 top real estate players in the region here on this board, and they're very activist, and they have a lot of influence. And so our thought was that we want to go way beyond just trying to make sure we have a diverse board. That's one thing we can do. But we want to do much more than that. So we want to help in any way we can to create positive change through the board, the faculty, the students, the curriculum, and even in the recruiting side of who we try and get interested in real estate. Because we realized, I think when I make the moves to try and make the board diverse, you run into an issue where you don't have enough people out there to go solicit and train and have you join, because we haven't grown them, and so we needed more of an outreach and more of a sustained effort to help make those ranks that are being educated more reflective of the community, and therefore help our eventual goal of having, to the board level, that we can reflect more of that as we go along. So that's going to be a very big effort, and Diane Sugimura and Kristen Ryan have volunteered to be our leads on that. I guess a third area would be the board's support of what I'll just call the program's growth and evolution. On the graduate level in the MSRE program, we've now had 10 classes that have graduated, and so it's kind of, I was a little surprised to realize that when I thought about it. I thought it was fewer than that, but it's 10 classes. This year's class, we were worried about during the pandemic that it might shrink, but it actually has come out strong. We've got 27 students in this class, of which 3 are from the German program that we have a dual degree program with the Regensburg University in Germany, and we have 2 Chinese students this year. So for a virtual program in a difficult time, very pleased to see it at that level. And we also are now adding the flexibility on the MSRE program, where student can choose to do it in, basically a 1-year field of study, or could opt for a 2-year study. So depending on your situation and your priorities, you've got now 2 different ways to play that. And then the other area of growth is in the undergraduate side. And in the spring of 2018, they approved a real estate minor in the undergraduate side of the house. And so the first grads came out of that in 2019 in the spring. And we now have 72 students in that minor program. So that's a big area of growth for us. And perhaps even more exciting, the Board of Regents for the University of Washington approved a undergraduate major program in June of this year. And so that's being rolled out, and we have 200 students right now in the introductory undergraduate course. And that course is a prerequisite to, everyone has to go through that and pass that before you could be considered, to making that your major in real estate. So the fact that there's 200 in that class right now for this quarter, and if that same number were to happen, winter and spring as well, that's 600 people going through an introductory level, which of course not all of them are going to head into the major, but that's a big group as a feeder mechanism into the program. And so we think we have big things coming our way. We've got, I think, just 16 declared so far, but by the number of people that are inquiring and the early touches, I wouldn't be surprised if there were 40 to 60 in this first wave, which would be really amazing. And so this is a big growth area that will, by numbers, kind of quickly dwarf the master's program that we actually started with. And I guess we're a little unusual. I believe most universities start with the undergraduate and then grow a graduate program. It ended up going the other way in this one. So we're doing a lot to help ramp up to handle this this new student volume, our volume of students, because we want to make sure that we are able to serve them like we have the graduate students. Because that's one thing I think that our program is known for, which is very high touch. The graduate program has always done a great job of taking these students and getting them into the Seattle real estate scene. They meet very many of the senior people in the industry and have a lot of access to them. And there's mentorships and a lot of employment opportunities that are put out there. So that is a challenge when you start having these large numbers on the undergraduate side. So we really have to ramp up from where we are today in order to also provide some quality support to that next wave of students that's coming in. And the fourth area I want to comment on is the area of research. Our committee has been a little quiet on that front the last couple of years, and there's some reasons for that I don't need to go into, but we just have a new chair just agreed to be our leader here a few weeks ago. It's Jack McCullough, who's one of the most renowned land use attorneys in the region, if not the most. And Jack has agreed to chair this effort. And I think there's a lot of synergy that is not being realized right now on the research side between the academic connections and the world of practical practitioners, on the industry side. There's funding sources, there's ideas, there's support, there's all sorts of things that the two sides are going to be able to, I think, help each other with. So we're just starting that process now of starting to have some clearinghouse events where everyone gets to know each other better, and we can start looking for those opportunities that are probably latent but haven't been really explored as much. And partly because of the growth curve we've been on, it's sometimes you only can do so much in certain environments. So, but we think there's something there, and research is going to be an important part of that.
Well, that's great. I mean, the research sounds wonderful. To add on, I can second all the things you said about the opportunities being, a member of the class right now, second year MSRE, the networking, the chance to talk with industry professionals, the people in my cohort, in my year and plus or minus 1 year. I mean, those are people that I can see keeping in contact with, doing deals with, being resources to call them 10 years from now as they go out to different companies, to be able to call them up and, ask them for advice on different parts of real estate that they then go on to focus in.
I'm glad that's been your experience.
So changing gears, books. Are you reading any books right now that you could share any insight into why you chose it?
Yeah, given the year we're in, there's two books that I've digested that I just have been so fascinated with. One of them is from 1353, and one of them is a current book. The one from 1353 is called the Decameron. I don't know if you've ever heard it or not. It's by Giovanni Boccaccio. And it actually is a book that's been on my bookshelf for about, 25 years, because when I was much younger, I did one of those greatest books club things, where all these beautiful leather-bound books came. And this thing is like 1,000 pages thick, so I never cracked it. But I realized that it was about the Black Plague of 1348 in Florence. And this guy was an amazingly good author, and he wrote this book that is a series of 100 novellas that are all things that it's set up so that there's a group of 7 young women and 3 young men who have escaped the plague of Florence, and they're off in some villa on the outskirts. And they basically sit around all day long and tell sort of stories. And some of them are practical, almost like moral lessons, and some are a little on the naughty side, actually, which has surprised me. But it's a great insight into the thought process of people back then, and what life was like, and what it was like to live through a plague back then. And so it's interesting to compare something from so long ago with what the whole world's going through now. And so it's a mouthful to read, but I would recommend it. It's really interesting, and it is considered great literature. Most of us don't know it, and I didn't either until I cracked it. But really worthwhile. And the second book is It's titled 1968, The Year That Rocked the World, by a guy named Mark Kurlansky. And this is, I was at Berkeley the last 2 years of my undergraduate experience. So that was 1968 through 1970, which was a tumultuous year at Cal. And reading this book was interesting for me because I lived through it, but as a young guy that transferred from Northwestern to Cal and was meeting new friends and having all these great collegiate experiences, you're part of all the revolutions happening around you, but you're busy studying and meeting friends. And so I had a lot of ideas how it went down, but it was very interesting to go back and read a book that put it all in context of all the things that were going on, and not just at US universities, but the book highlights the fact that it was a year that stuff was fermenting everywhere, from Poland to Prague to German universities to the French, the British, and in the Arab world and Mexico. And I mean, there was student unrest and things happening everywhere. And it was really interesting to go back and sort of walk through that time period of Watergate and all that stuff, or the predicates with Nixon and everything. I've been trying to decide which was most intense. Was it back then when you had students being, in some cases, shot dead on their campuses, or today when you have a president who lost by 6 million votes who won't go home, who won't leave the office? So it's really, again, interesting. Just like with the plague, it was interesting to look at the plague way back when and how we're doing, and then also to think about the revolutionary ferment of the late 60s and compare that with what we've been going through here as a country these last years, and hopefully getting through it just like we did last time.
All right, so wrapping up, if people wanted to connect with you, what's the best way for people to reach out? LinkedIn, or how do people find you?
I'm really very accessible and don't hide. So I'm happy if people, email me, text me, use LinkedIn, whatever, because I like the contact and am not hiding. So happy to have anybody contact me as they will.
Great. Well, we'll put a link here in the video then and get that out to people. So thanks so much for coming on today.
You're so welcome, Jeff. I enjoyed every minute of it.